Hello, hello. Check the mic, check the mic. Hello, hello. Check the mic, check the mic. I'm just going to start. We had a little audio issues here with YouTube. Um, but I'm back. We're back. Financial Tides, Cellframe Social, live today on YouTube. Welcome in, folks. What's on your mind this week? We're back from a little holiday break. The chipmunks have emerged from um, a short little hibernation. Of course, chipmunk, a very active animal, building extremely elaborate burrows to store up for the winter. And shout out to the sea punks, the first meme coin on the Cellframe CF20 standard on the Cellframe network. Shout out to the sea punks. Great to be here. Great to be talking about Cellframe. We've got great stuff rolling down. We've got the CF20, the standard Cellframe on its native network, now available on centralized exchanges and Bitmart. That announcement is rolling out today. We've got the C-Punks live, and we're still, sort of in this post-quantum question on social media, on crypto Twitter. What is going to happen with when quantum hits? So I've got some interesting information for you guys today about that from Dimitri, because there's some details. It's great to be talking about Cellframe. It covers so many different areas of technology that's going on right now, whether that be the boom in hardware building, the great build out having to do with the AI bubble, or whether that's quantum computing itself, the crazy physics behind that. So, got some interesting stuff for you guys around that today. But first, I just wanted to share with you an experience I had over break talking about Cellframe, because I had such a great feeling that things are, I think with the quantum narrative coming out, our Cellframe community and probably our founders as well feel a little bit of a sense of vindication, because we've been talking about the quantum threat to crypto for a while, and now it's mainstream to talk about it, and there's arguments on both sides. There's a lot of different opinions out there about it, but obviously it's a little bit of a vindication, and I felt a similar sort of sense because I was talking to my brother-in-law, who's an art professor, and I don't normally talk about Cellframe, with my family. It's kind of, they're all humanities people like I am, and kind of tech. I talk about it with my dad. He's a bit of into the AI and education field right now. But so I was talking to my brother-in-law about art, and somehow the question of blockchain actually came up organically, because in the art world now there seems to be a little bit of a death of the old art world, and what's going on with NFTs and kind of the avant-garde is, we started talking about Milady. He played me this avant-garde art podcast, and they were talking about the Milady NFT project. And we kept on talking, and we got into the idea that there's a tech bubble. And I've been feeling it, and even though in a lot of mainstream tech media, people don't talk about it because stocks keep going up, there does seem to be various kinds of tech bubbles out there. And somehow I naturally, even though I don't want to shill Cellframe to my family, I naturally started talking about Cellframe because the idea of decentralized computing becomes so obvious and simple to explain to people when you talk about that, right? Like, what comes next? Like, say there is a bubble, and like Google uh, Google and Meta just start to collapse, and stock prices start to hemorrhage money. They start to do major layoffs. They start to curtail some of their services. What's next after that? And it becomes obvious, right? Like we can run the same services on decentralized networks. We have the hardware, it already exists. We don't, in people's homes. We have mining rigs. We have great, a great network of Bitcoin, Ethereum miners. We have people, gamers, with very powerful computers that sit idle most of the time. I mean, some people game many hours a day, but most people don't. So we have a network. So we can, Cellframe is essentially, as a service-oriented blockchain system, blockchain network, it can recruit that computing power that already exists in people's homes. So if there is a bubble that bursts in terms of Web 2 and giant server farms that are being built for AI and everything like that, right? ChatGPT, building giant data centers. Something could happen, and all that bursts. And what's next? And it's obvious. I can explain it to someone who's not in tech, and it, even without wanting to, it just starts to come out of me that yes, decentralized computing is the way forward. If you're talking, so it's great. Right? You don't have to. If you're shilling like a meme coin, it's a little bit harder to talk to someone who's not in the biz to say, okay, so there's this thing called digital currency, and then there's this thing that's branded as a dog with a hat, and then people collect it for some reason because the price goes up, and blah blah blah. Right? If you want to explain Cellframe to someone who's not really related to you, say, okay, there's a bubble in tech. It could burst. There are huge server farms out there, and if they sort of collapse, all that hardware can be dispersed among people, and you can have distributed versions of that. Okay, and then how do you explain how can you get people to visualize exactly what that looks like? Well, you have different examples out there. For example, the easiest one is like SETI, and there's another one called gene folding. So these are science projects that are very data intensive, and they ask people to run calculations on their home computer, right? So SETI is a search for extraterrestrial intelligence. They scan the skies with huge radio telescopes, and they ask people who are fans of extraterrestrial intelligence to go out and run those calculations on their home computer. And that was a successful project. And also there was another gene folding experiment run by University of Pennsylvania, labs and so forth. And they're also just sort of asking people to run calculations on their home computer. And then the next example to that would be BitTorrent. And BitTorrent is a very cool downloading service that's completely voluntary. People will host and upload videos just out of the goodness of their heart because they like the network, and they in exchange for other people also doing it. And then the next step would be to tell people, okay, check out Torrent if you've ever used it. Look at how fast it is. Torrent can be extremely fast because if someone is next, if the person serving you the software, sorry, or not the software, whichever kind of file. I've downloaded software from BitTorrent. It's a small crime, but I think we've all done it. So you can download all these files from from BitTorrent very quickly because the person serving you might be very close to you geographically. So you can see that downloading it can be faster than even from a professional Web 2 server farm type of situation because it's that distributed network, right? It can be very fast and it's extremely resilient. So people will say, oh, torrent still exists. It's like, yeah, uh, you can't really kill torrent. It's decentralized. There's no single node that you can attack that would take down torrent. So here's an example of a distributed service. Uh, but so what's the key then with a service like is being built on Cellframe, like CalVPN, say, micropayments. This is a term that I use a lot that I haven't heard too many other people in the space use, but it makes sense to talk to someone who's not in the field. Why just have a voluntary BitTorrent? Why not have one based on tiny payments where people are actually incentivized through that? And for me, the way to explain that, the next step to explain that would be, for example, with AI, like I don't want to buy a ChatGPT subscription. I'm not a person who loves to use chatbots all the time. I think there's people out there who are like running their whole life around chatbots now. I use it once in a while for certain kinds of research, certain kinds of writing. Well, actually, I don't really use it for writing, but maybe for a translation or for an editing job, it can be good. Use it once in a while. I would much rather just pay a few cents to my friends on the network to run that calculation for me, rather than to pay a subscription to ChatGPT, which is like a weird company run by a very strange guy who like lied about that it was going to be a non-profit, etc. So all these centralized things, all the problems with centralized networks keep coming up. The company could fold. You could lose all your data. The CEO could go to jail. The CEO could start doing all kinds of crazy things. We want decentralized apps, and the cool thing about Cellframe is we have true decentralization. There's not a single smart contract holder for a Cellframe app. I just to go on a little tangent here. I love Ethereum. Everyone who's in the third generation blockchain space like Cellframe owes a lot to Ethereum. And Vitalik, a brilliant programmer who in his young days, developed Ethereum. But did you guys see the latest thing that Vitalik was up to? He's now actually proposing a global AI slowdown button. Okay, Vitalik, you're going a little nuts here. There's no global consensus about. There is no global button, buddy. Like, you have gone a little too off the rails with your visions of unicorns and kittens and rainbows that you wear on your t-shirt, and UFOs. There's no alien super authority that's going to come and say, China is going to continue to develop AI. The U.S. government is going to continue to develop AI. It's been identified as like a potential weapon in like whatever future war that these people are preparing for. So there's no centralization is in that extreme way that like Vitalik kind of sees it. There is no global consensus on AI or anything. So yeah, I think so it's great to talk about Cellframe with people that just kind of randomly comes up, and I get really inspired after that happens because it's just so easy to explain to people. Yes, we need decentralized computing with micropayments, and you can't do that with regular dollars, right? So that's like also if you just need to explain crypto to people. The rails on which dollars move are not the internet, right? So if you have an internet service, the money for it goes in a different route than the bits, right? So the beautiful thing about Cellframe service is that the money and the bits run on exactly the same rails. So it's written in pure in C code so that it can recruit the hardware of the machine it's running on. The Cellframe node allows you to run the service and to receive and send payment for the service on the same rails. So decentralized computing and crypto go hand in hand. You can't, maybe, if you build a digital dollar, of course, in the future, but, no one's doing that right now. They're way behind. So if we're gonna, if decentralized computing has its moment, it's gonna need a service like Cellframe to do that. Let's see. All right, so I've been rambling about this for a bit, but I just wanted to share with you guys my experience of talking just off the cuff to a family member who I have no interest in shilling to them, but it just becomes evident, like, of why Cellframe is important. It just comes, and then we have the quantum issue. People have been talking about quantum computing now for a while. This is another kind of way in which Cellframe is very forward-thinking. Fundamentally, our headline on the website is it's a service-oriented blockchain, and then in fine print it says we're quantum proof. There's talking about bubbles and tech bubbles. I also wanted to mention an interesting thing I learned this week. I was listening to this contrarian kind of guy, Martin Shkreli, who was went to prison. He's known as a pharma bro, but he's an investor and he likes to short things. And he was shorting quantum stocks. And I didn't know this because I think the kind of lift that the Cellframe experienced with the quantum narrative, I think that was appropriate. I think it wasn't so huge or to be out of proportion, but apparently some of the quantum computing stocks out there experienced like 1,000% growth. So Martin was saying you got to short all those stocks. There are lots of, and I think that's true. I don't think a lot of those companies like have a clear path to profitability or whatever, or a clear path to even like a good technology or a use case. People are just hyping quantum stocks. There's also a bubble. Another thing that happened this week, the past couple of weeks on Twitter, was a kind of very America-centric debate, but obviously things that happen in America end up being a global discussion, is this H-1B debate. And on one side was Elon saying, if America's going to be the global technological leader, we need to bring in the best and the brightest. And then sort of nationalist, protectionist, MAGA people were countering that, saying, no, we have to prioritize American workers. It's a valid debate, obviously, on both sides. One thing that came out of that is, okay, we have these brilliant programmers coming in, but there's also kind of this undercurrent of relatively low-skilled programmers and IT workers being imported. And that noticing that also kind of led people to notice that there is another type of bubble out there, and that bubble is of low quality code. There's been a lot of, like I said, companies were just hauling in lots and lots of workers, and some of the, this doesn't count for all the tech companies, but some of them, I think, especially like Deloitte, some of these B2B companies were producing a lot of work, but that ultimately isn't going to stand the test of time. And so we have a bubble in the production of code that code in the end isn't worth holding on to for the long term. And I think that's another reason why Cellframe is ahead of the game. It's ahead of the game in knowing about the quantum threat. It's also ahead of the game in knowing that if you want to create a software that's going to last and make a difference, you have to have a discipline. You have to have a high quality code. So Cellframe is built, designed, by Dmitry, who's an incredible programmer and visionary tech guy, with a very hardcore team written in C. So this is another thing that Cellframe is ahead. If you look at different online communities right now, a lot of people are talking about the value of going back to C code. It's much more efficient than other types of code, and a lot of the kind of the bubble in programming has come with these kind of simpler, easier to use, object-oriented languages, where it's not efficient, and just more and more code keeps being written that's not going to stand the test of time. So this H1B discourse kind of also fed into the discourse, like what actually do we need to be, what kind of software do we need to be producing and how? And I think with Cellframe, I think people who are monitoring the project and monitoring the GitHub can see that there's like a hardcore team writing very, very sophisticated code that is worth the time and effort to build. It's not just throwaway code. Anyway, so that's my little rant today on how I like to talk about Cellframe these days to people, and how it's really, I feel, really well positioned in the both with the quantum narrative coming and with a potential tech bubble looming. It's pretty cool to be able to talk about it. So it's sort of, yeah. I mean, there's it all goes back to this article I talked about a few weeks ago. People kind of know that we're in a tech bubble, but I think people are fooling themselves that this time it's different. And there was actually an article in the Financial Times saying, well, yes, this looks like a tech bubble, but this time it's different because AI itself will create new innovation. Well, okay, maybe, right? But I think you're a little bit fooling yourself. Innovation, true innovation, doesn't happen all the time. It comes in fits and starts. For example, if you look at the history of technology in general, as far as if you trace it by productivity, there were huge productivity growths related to technology up into like the 1960s and 70s. Excuse me. With new metals coming out, new chemicals, new cheap ways to create plastics and metals and industrial chemicals, right? But like since Elon's been building rockets, and it seems like super innovative, and it's true they've been extremely innovative, but it's still fairly marginal. I mean, he's still essentially using 1960s technology. He's using stainless steel instead of aluminum to build his rockets, right? But it's still something that we have been doing essentially since the 1960s. And you can't just hope that innovation is going to happen because AI exists. It's a little bit of a pipe dream. I think we are going to see a bubble in big tech. And I think Cellframe is a great play against that. And it doesn't have to be a post-apocalyptic play. I think, obviously, big companies are great. They do drive innovation. Something like quantum computing, and Google is investing all this money into their new quantum chip. Not essentially they don't have to make money right away, right? The fact that they're big, they can sort of spend money on deep research. So that's great. But I think, there are lots of cases where a distributed network can also live side by side with big tech, especially in underserved areas around the world. People that can't afford to pay for Google or ChatGPT services. Maybe Google and ChatGPT aren't as interested in them as customers. But places in developing nations may want to adopt a kind of a decentralized computing model. for themselves. And then people who are concerned about privacy, who are concerned about data and sovereignty, they will also be drawn to distributed computing. And then ultimately, once the services have a critical mass, they can actually outcompete those centralized services. Like I said, even on speed, if we have a video downloading service that's decentralized, it can be extremely fast, extremely robust, resilient, data agnostic, etc., etc. So, like I said again in my recent video, the next quarter century, I think, will be the century of decentralization. And I think Cellframe is the best project out there in terms of driving towards decentralized computing. Now back to the quantum topic. So Dmitry, I was talking to Dmitry, and he was telling me that I should warn you guys about what's going on out there in the quantum security space, that there are some kind of weird scam type marketing efforts going on out there with people claiming to create quantum proof security. Now, what Cellframe has integrated, and is the first live blockchain to actually be running these algorithms live, they're not quantum proof algorithms, they're quantum resistant. So these are algorithms that were built with the quantum future in mind. But they're not impossible to crack, they're just very difficult to crack. So you would need some mind-bogglingly huge advance in quantum computing to crack them, but it is still possible because any kind of asymmetrical cryptography is still possible to crack with quantum computing. So what we're talking about when we talk about quantum proof encryption is actual encryption using quantum technology itself, right? So quantum entanglement is when you have two electrons that can be sent at light speed but continue to be entangled and sort of communicate with each other. So there's like an effect that's known as like quantum teleportation, where information can be instantly, at faster than light speed, right, instantaneously transmitted when two electrons that are quantum entangled, or photons, when one changes its state, the other changes its state too. And so that allows you to create a type of asymmetrical quantum encryption, right? So basically what would happen is you would use like a special laser beam or a special type of cable to send like single electrons or photons from one place to another. And you'd send this like a small amount, like a certain set of these entangled particles, and you would send those, and then when they were once they're read, you'd have a symmetrical key, a symmetrical encryption key, right? So each side would encrypt using that set, right? So that's the only type of encryption that's actually theoretically and practically completely quantum proof. And so the thing that Dmitry said to watch out against is that there seems to be now, what he referred to as scam projects, where they say that they're running this type of quantum encryption on normal cables. And he said that there's no actual way to do that. So people claiming to do that are essentially lying. So when you look at those type of projects, just be careful, because the only real way to use quantum encryption is to have like a specialized type of fiber that's able to send these like single entangled electrons back and forth. And any kind of encryption, so no matter how big you get, a certain amount of qubits will eventually be able to break any kind of classical encryption, even crystals dilithium, which, something like this is the new generation of quantum resistant encryption types that Cellframe is integrating. So those are meant, like I said, those are designed with the quantum age in mind, so that you can realistically stand up to quantum attacks. And some people are saying that Bitcoin is quantum resistant already. But, Dimitri is saying that's not really true. You don't need this. Some people are saying, oh, you would need billions of qubits to crack the kind of 256-bit encryption that exists in Bitcoin. But that's not really true. He was saying that these hash algorithms are extremely vulnerable to these kind of attacks. You don't need that much. They're very light on memory. You don't need some kind of super amount of memory in order to do these attacks on the hash algorithms that are protecting Bitcoin. So according to Dmitry, it's not a pipe dream. Like the people that are saying, oh, it's going to take decades for enough qubits to be created for a powerful enough quantum computer, it would take decades. But we were already seeing, hundreds of qubits already in production by Google. A network of those, I think, could already start to crack these encryptions. He was saying 256 bits is not a lot. So the keys that are now being used, the private keys that are now being used to protect Bitcoin, are very, very small, just in terms of the bits, compared to the quantum resilient new generation of algorithms that Cellframe is integrating. So basically, the Bitcoin is vulnerable, and there's another thing the Bitcoiners were saying where they have a system of like temporary addresses, where like while you're trying to crack one address, it's going to be changing. I don't have the full, obviously, technical knowledge behind this to explain it, but I can give you the general takeaway that even that system, anything that has to do with asymmetrical cryptography, where you have to guess the private part of the key, you don't have to. Dimitri was saying you don't have to know the right key at the right moment. You can actually you can kind of pick a key that works. A powerful enough quantum computer can create a key that can crack even this type of encryption that uses multiple temporary addresses. So basically, any type of asymmetrical encryption that we're using is vulnerable, and the things, the hash algorithms that are protecting Bitcoin now are extremely vulnerable. So that's the takeaway, and to take that back to kind of the wider community aspect of that, yes, people are saying, okay, Bitcoin will be able to hard fork. They will be able to integrate these new algorithms. But, and there's actually even a quote from Satoshi himself back in the old days talking about this quantum future, and he was saying, we as a community should be able to decide a new algorithm. We can pause. We can, as a community, go back to before the chain was compromised, start over with new encryption type, etc. But I think these kind of community forks, they were already difficult historically for Bitcoin, and I wonder now how much more difficult they are now, because the Bitcoin community is huge now. So Bitcoin's great rise up to 100,000, that's great for the Bitcoin community. Their assets are going up, but it also makes it much more cumbersome. mean, what? So now you have institutions, hedge funds, mom and pop investment shops, random people using Cash App to buy Bitcoin, people on Bitcoin ATMs. How are you going to get this? How are you going to turn this huge ship around? How are you going to hard fork? Satoshi isn't active anymore. Those tokens will be left behind. You would need to swap private keys. You would need to swap your private key for a public one. That would be, a taxable event. That would be a very difficult situation for many people and for the Bitcoin community. So I think, the Bitcoiners, the Bitcoin maxis put up a valiant effort to say that, there is no imminent threat to Bitcoin, but that's not the case. Ultimately, Bitcoin is very vulnerable to a quantum situation. Quantum computing is very real. Um, so yeah, it'll be really exciting to see what happens in terms of innovation with actual quantum cryptography, like I mentioned, with the sending the entangled electrons. It's a brave new world of computing, of physics. It's pretty sweet that we have a founder like Dmitry who's like extremely versed in the realms of hard sciences, as in addition to being a great programmer. I think we were living in this crazy technological world where quantum computers are being produced. But there's fundamental layers of physics that are involved in this, and to stay ahead of the game with that is going to be so interesting. And one of the reasons I find it very comforting to be part of the Cellframe community, that we have kind of that vision moving forward. And we're not a meme coin. We have utility in terms of distributed computing, like real world utility. KLVPN works. It's not a pipe dream. We have real utility. We have real vision, and and we're not like married to a project just because it has community. I think it's for a Bitcoiner or for some other kind of first, second generation blockchain. I think people have a little bit of a cognitive dissonance right now, saying that, oh, we really believe in Solana. Like, oh, I'm the Solana guy. We really believe in Bitcoin. Like, yeah, your community is strong, but if you have a strong community behind a not so strong tech stack, doubt is going to creep in. So yeah, just very optimistic right now and bullish on Cellframe. On the Cellframe community itself, I think we have a great and very rapidly growing group. So thank you all. Hit me up on Twitter, on Cellframe Social. Hit us up. Let us know what else is on your mind, and we'll be back next week with more financial tides and more analysis of what's going on in the world through the lens of Cellframe. Shout out to the Chipmunks, P-Punks, and all the great developments that are happening on Cellframe. Again, keep track of our socials. More coming down the pipeline. All right, this is Gleb for Cellframe team, over and out.